Hey guys, I'm Jenny, and this might be a two-part video. I tried to make it this morning for numerous benzodiazepine, either tapering or recovery groups that I just became aware of a few days ago, looking for information on a specific situation. And the outpouring and the messages were just mind-boggling. So I thought it would be easier to make a video that they can see. So I think, when I get to about 25 minutes or so, I'm going to go into part two if need be. And this video is specifically for anybody who has had any problems after being prescribed benzodiazepine, attempting to taper off of them, tapering off of them, issues with doctors, and all things of that nature. Basically, what I want to cover is my present situation, where I stand with them, my disclaimer and qualifications, my biases, that are pretty strong, I ain't gonna lie, against big pharma and the medical industries and down to the doctors and the marketers. What a protracted withdrawal actually is. I'm going to do a very, very brief, simple outline as I became aware that there is some legal recourse for some of this, which is kind of new. Most medical industries, I'm talking the big ones, pay so much in malpractice insurance. They're either not worried about it or they think they have a slam dunk. I did too, but the truth of the matter is, after consulting with a major firm that deals with medical malpractice, that's just not the case. So people need to know about that. But the primary reason I wanted to do this, and what I offer people based on their questions and their situation, is self-advocacy. Can't stress the importance of it if you're struggling, especially trying to come off of these. Let me give you a brief rundown about what I know. And I'm also going to try to be very, very clear about what is simply my opinion and what is medically factual, can easily be proven, and is well known. I'm also going to link or tell you about some excellent resources. And in case I forget, let me do that right now. There's a Dr. Joseph, it's spelled Josef. Last name is Der, Whitting, at Tapering Clinic. You do a quick search, you can find him on YouTube. Since he's popped up, I'm seeing a lot of doctors, specifically in the psychiatric industry, that are also coming forward and handling their practices in a totally new fashion of transparency, honesty, full knowledge, respectful treatment. It was just mind-blowing. I had known about this, and I think they were basically censored for a while, and they're just free to come out with the truth now about what really happened specifically. I think it happened with the medical industry, period, but specifically with psychiatric medications and the dangers that they do pose, and how they have now found out depression and anxiety and a lot of commonly labeled mental illnesses or labels have nothing to do with a chemical imbalance, though people have been told that that's what causes it and that there's no shame in it whatsoever. Oh, I think my husband's just popping in, but I'm going to go and take the 25 minutes and try to do part two as well. So it was approximately sometime in the 90s that this started. Let me back up way back to when I was an adolescent and a young woman. I did a lot of partying, got myself in a little bit of trouble with it. Entered into 12-step recovery programs in 1985 with tremendous success. in the period that I used recreationally, it was almost impossible to get anything like benzodiazepines, barbiturates. Those were big, I guess what we would call as a teenager scores. I do remember being able to get them at some point around 19, and I do remember that instant falling in love. Like, why isn't the whole world taking these? Luckily, back then, as I said, they were very, very difficult to get, very, very rare. And, the big thing back then in the 80s was Coke, which is relatively easy to come off of. There's a psychological component, but it's pretty easy. So I did that and remained in that. Also went to therapy during that period, childhood trauma stuff, and being new in recovery. So I was like 20, 21, and they had normal, regular cognitive therapy talk where you could just go make an appointment, sit down. Pam, I remember, and the first one was this big old biker guy that got into recovery himself and then went to school, got his degrees, and became a counselor. And, that's what it was. It was 12-step. There was no suggestion or idea about any drug. It was pure cognitive therapy counseling. There was group therapy that was offered. And in that first year of recovery, that's what I did. And it was just beautiful. Totally benefited from it. So 10 years went by. By that time, I had had my first child. And from the time he was born till around 3 or 4, I was just high on oxytocin. Now, back in those days, recovery was so much better and so much easier in that you could totally abstain. You didn't take anything, so you didn't have to bother with anything. So I'm just high on life and oxytocin and this mind-blowing 10-pound baby boy that I was told I would never have, right? So he's around 3 or 4. I had to work full time. He was in daycare. I hated that, but that was the reality of the situation. Did wind up marrying his father, and he was just not really involved at all. He worked in the restaurant industry, had a mistress for the most part of our marriage. I didn't care. I was just in love with this kid. Okay, but now he's getting older. He's getting ready for kindergarten and going to school, different events, Boy Scouts, whatever the case may be. More of a demand on my time, and then all that, oh my God, I have to work full time and I want to be home with this kid kind of thing. I required more help from him, and he was not able to give that. He relapsed and went out there from the time I was pregnant. He could not handle it, and he never recovered till this day. So I started to get what I now know to be a mild, I will say it was a moderate depression. And I had a lot of stress and anxiety. For all practical purposes, I was a single mom. I had this beautiful, what I consider, well, all babies are, but this one was mine. So I consider a miracle child. Just crazy in love with this kid, and I still was. But I realized the need for 2 parents. And, at least the need, they say it takes a village. And I was getting stressed, and I found myself very depressed, more angry about the fact, that I knew he had this mistress, money was being spent. He was actually bringing my child out on dates with this chick and telling him, basically not to tell me. It would make mommy really sad. We were very close. We were bonded, and he never did. He has now. And I had no idea. It was a long-term thing. Okay, so that's neither here nor there. I'm getting depressed. I'm getting anxious. And I knew, based on my past experience, that therapy, if it didn't help, it certainly wasn't going to hurt. And I also know today, looking back, I was experiencing the normal human condition. I had situations going on around me that would depress any woman and make anybody a little anxious. So I make an appointment with a therapist. This is he was 93, almost 4, so it would have been 95, 96, around 97, 98. Okay, the last time was in the mid-80s. I had no idea of the changes that had taken place in the industry. So I find a therapist, and within 5 minutes, I realize they now all work under a psychiatrist or a psychiatric organization of some sorts. She asked me why I was there. I told her a little bit what was going on. And she said, well, what we like to do here is send our clients to the psychiatrist, just in case you may not, but they have a lot of new good medications out now that could greatly enhance the therapeutic experience. I was real proud of the total abstinence. I still went to meetings. Now we're 13 years into it. I remember my son, he would go, when they had daycare, we called them the meets, and I try to make it a pleasant experience for him. And it also sucked for him, a little kid having to sit around, but I was just into it and able to have total abstinence. So now I'm with this therapist. She sends me into the psychiatrist, seemed nice enough. Told him literally within 8 minutes, I'm sure she had given him the 12-minute records that she had. I gave him a brief rundown of what was going on, and he felt I could benefit tremendously from, and I was also very, very thin. Not like, I probably looked anorexic at that point, but it wasn't a textbook kind of thing. And so he suggested something called Remeron, which was an SSRI that also allegedly stimulated appetite. And my primary care had already had me on Prozac. The Prozac was prescribed before the depression began. I was acing it up till then, up at 5 o'clock in the morning, getting everything ready for the day, preparing supper for that night, getting my little boy up, dressed, off to daycare. I had some really phenomenal jobs. I'm not college degreed, and I was really blessed in that area of getting some good jobs, made some good money, and I had been doing it, and I had future plans. I did wind up eventually getting my real... That's all neither here nor there. But life was fine. I bought a house. I worked in real estate and found a house at this insane price, a beach house in a part of Massachusetts called Rocky Nook. It's separate. You have to go over a bridge to get to it. It's not an island, but you have to go over a bridge to get to it. There's only one way in and one way out. And you could see the private beach from where we lived, and then there was a public beach down the street. So, I was raising this little boy, in this beautiful area, in this little, beach, winterized cottage. But it was pretty cool. And, real happy. I'm not paying much attention to him. He's not paying much attention to me. He'd check in every once in a while, but it turned out to be almost like a marriage in name only. So I'm in the psychiatrist's office, and they start pumping more SSRIs, and I was visibly anxious. I was always a very talkative person, a very active person, so that was labeled anxiety. And they were like, oh, you're really operating as a single mother. Of course you'd be anxious. I remember the depression. I don't remember the anxiety. So I believe it was Klonopin right off the bat, though other benzos were to come throughout the years, like a rainstorm. But it was clonazepam, I want to say 4 milligrams to start with, mixed with these SSRIs. I'm going to end in a minute, but what we've come to know, that was my story. I'm going to give you some medical facts, and I'll try to be as clear as I can when it's just simply my opinion. Obviously, the industry of therapy and psychiatric care, which I wasn't seeking psychiatric care. I didn't need psychiatric care. I needed a therapist for a couple of months tops. And had I not gone to a therapist, I think it naturally would have passed on its own, because medicating normal. Let me throw that video out there. I believe it's on Netflix, and it's excellent, because that's what we do. We medicate the human condition. Um, um, Here's some facts that I've come to find out. The testing they did for these SSRIs, if they, I don't know what, if any, they did on benzodiazepines, was shit pseudoscience. It was a 3-month test that proved absolutely nothing, and they knew it. But the psychiatric industry was shrinking in that, the 1940s and 50s. I think they made their money on institutionalizing people, particularly women. I just found out the word hysterectomy comes from hysteria, that they would label women with that were having trouble with pregnancy or unable to conceive. They would wind up institutionalized under the diagnosis of hysteria, hence the hysterectomy. I didn't want to think about how that went down, but that's basically how their money was made, was by institutionalizing people, a lot of experimentation. The Tewksbury Hospital in Massachusetts, one of the most notorious. Literally, Helen Keller stayed in one of the buildings with her teacher there, and she obviously was not exposed to any of that, but they had the underground tunnels. They have over 1,000 unmarked graves across the street for people who died. Records were destroyed. They died from experiments they were doing on them. So that was fading out. No internet yet. They couldn't anticipate it. Oh, what are we going to do? We'll go broke. We can't even afford to keep this building running. I think they particularly preyed on vulnerable people who maybe didn't have a family, maybe did have some issues, could not articulate or express what was going on. And by the time they were medicated, I think they used a lot of lithium back then. It was one of the first psychiatric drugs. They used to actually soak their patients in these salts, lithium salts. But that was dying down. We're coming into the 60s. Women are getting a little bit more hip. And it was just more difficult, to commit. Mostly women, some men, and let's face it, we can't fill a hospital with serial killers. They're out there. They were mixed in with this woman who was sad because she couldn't have a baby. So that was going. They had to come up with something. Depression, anxiety, sadness, even intrusive thoughts can sometimes be mental illness, but mostly is just part of the human condition. The pharmaceutical companies needed to come up with a way to start making money for the psychiatrists, because it wasn't going to work for these institutions anymore. So they came up with these toxic, this is an opinion and kind of a fact, but these toxic SSRIs that do one of two things. All psychotropic drugs and psychiatric drugs, the antipsychotics, Depakote, mood stabilizers, you name them. First of all, there was a 3-month study on the possibility of a chemical imbalance in the brain that were causing these conditions. They now know it has anxiety, depression. Most of these labels have nothing to do with a chemical imbalance. If anything, an imbalance was caused as a result of the medication. We all now know, like Scientology, they just couldn't anticipate the internet. So they went on, with this narrative. It's when things started being commercialized. You turn on the TV and see all these ads, these depressed, miserable people. They take the Zoloft or Effexor or Seroquel, you name it. Some are worse than others, but they're all bad. And all of a sudden, their brain is balanced and they're playing fetch with the dog and have wonderful lives. So a lot of propaganda was pushed out there. And that all started with the pharmaceutical companies, but that this is the hierarchy. Then it goes down to the marketing people, the sales reps. They're the ones that, actually had the most power, because they're the ones that could reach out directly to the doctors. A lot of individual practices back then, but then things started growing, into medical groups and things of that nature. And these reps go in, still happening now, and they would just convince the doctor on this pseudoscience that was bullshit. Any doctor with a brain cell could look at that and say, that's not enough, and they particularly targeted the psychiatric community. So the reps would go in, recommend this for several different diagnoses, and there was, and there is, and there continues to be financial or materialistic gain from these reps. They would get in very, very friendly with the doctors. I'm sure you saw, I forget the name of it now, but there's movies all about that big company that, they sued, which was a drop in the bucket for them. But they would take these doctors out on elaborate vacations. If their kids were graduating, they'd get these elaborate gifts, and there is record of numerous of these companies, these industries, these psychiatric industries that actually committed fraud, because these marketers and pharmaceutical companies, through the marketers, would pay them as a reward or commission or whatever they called it. I forget. I will remember. And it would go on the books as something else. So these doctors started going ham. They did it with narcotics for the longest time. They had everybody on OxyContin, and everybody was paying attention to that, but no one was paying attention to the psychiatric industry, which was loading people up on these SSRIs. I'm going to wind this down as part one. A lot of times I'll try to upload something, and I yap a lot. The video's too long. So instead of trying to edit and mess with it, I'm going to download this to my YouTube and TikTok, and these several groups that are related to benzodiazepines specifically have been given the link to watch this. And I will do part two as soon as possible. My gorgeous, perfect, wonderful husband, who does in fact have a medical degree and has been essential in helping me. One of the things that's required for tapering and recovery, and you can't even think about this or deal with this, when you first become aware and it's first happening, he provided, or through example, radical lifestyle change. With diet, the elimination of sugar and gluten and processed foods, and then incorporating exercise. I'm not here to plug the supplements that we do sell that you do have to have a medical license for. I won't even leave a link. That's not what this is about, but it's just part of my story of recovery. So the food, and then adding all the supplements, and then bringing I was 55 when I met him, so my 56-year-old butt to the gym, like actually lifting weights. I do a little bit of muscle work now, but I mostly am into like power walking. I'm up to about 8 miles a day, and because it's summer, we have a pool, I'm doing some laps. So exercise. And then setting up an evening routine that would make it more likely to have good REM sleep. People struggling in any way with benzodiazepines, especially if you're tapering, sleep is a nightmare. If you get it, I remember if I got it at all, I would have these bizarre dreams. And I basically just became non-functional. The only thing I could do was take care of my second child, who was still in elementary school and then middle school, and it was the basics. He was safe, he was protected, he was loved, he was fed, he was bathed, he was clothed. Um, but there were a lot of sad days, because I think of just greed and incompetency, which is more prevalent now. Um, and then to recently find out there's actual legal recourse that can be taken. They've been untouchable for years. But now bigger law firms are saying, no, they cannot do that. They malpractice insurance up to the gilt. So it'll be no skin off their nose, but maybe it'll send a message. All right, guys, I'm going to wind down and I'll do part 2. So again, you'll be able to tell by the title what this is about, and I hope the benzodiazepine groups grasp it and catch it, and are able to see it. I checked with the moderators and administrators to see if it was okay. A lot of them, you can't do any self-promoting, but it was just too difficult, there was one group I can do a live, but this is just easier. And the addresses have been left, so I hope it helps. I think part 2 will help even more. Y'all be blessed. Looking forward to seeing you shortly. Bye-bye.